You have to wonder what the conversations were going on at Big Finish. Oh, we can't do too much with Susan in these box sets because the TV show is bringing her back. The TV show clearly has big plans. Bad Wolf and Russell T Davies clearly have big plans for Susan. Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Mr. TARDIS and welcome to another Doctor Who Big Finish review as I try and catch up with their massive back catalogue. We've got another instalment here of Susan's War. This is a series which stars Carole Ann Ford as the Doctor's granddaughter Susan, and she is working for the Time Lords in the Time War, basically as a diplomat, trying to spread peace missions and trying to forge alliances across the Time War. And last year they released Susan's War Family Ties. This is a box set with two stories which reunites Susan with her grandfather, the Doctor, but in this case it's the War Doctor played by Jonathan Carley. This box set had two stories in it, The Lost Son by Sarah Cassidy and The Golden Child by Peter Angel-Hedes, and while I think Carole Ann Ford's performance in both stories is absolutely off the charts brilliant, I think that it left a lot of the character work on the table. I was a little bit mixed on it on my way out of the box set, but I was optimistic for the next box set, another box set with two stories in it, Grandfather Time. This has got two stories, The Last of the Khalids by David Llewellyn and The Vord Alliance by Andrew Smith. And Last of the Khalids starts with a really interesting conceit. Basically, due to the madness of the Time War, a pocket dimension has formed, and in this pocket dimension, a bunch of Khalids from the planet Skaro managed to escape Skaro and go into this pocket dimension before the end of their nuclear conflict with the Thals. And they form this new world called Khaledon, where the Khalids live peacefully and in prosperity. They even have these friendly drone servants which sound and look a lot like Daleks. Cardinal Erasmus of the Time Lord War Room, played by Damien Lynch, has been given the coordinates to Khaledon and takes the War Doctor and Susan there on a diplomacy mission to try and figure out what their deal is and whether or not they could be a potential ally in the Time War against the Daleks. There they meet the Khalid leader, Cosimus, played by Stephen Elder, who has a close relationship with a Khalid scientist only known as the Mechanic, who no one else on this world has seen. And it appears that there's a discord brewing on the planet Khaledon, which could make it a new front in the Time War.
I have brought the basic charge.
Greetings. Welcome to Khaledon. Please, sit. 237, report to the kitchens and have them send up some water and a selection of sweets.
Mission accepted.
Oh, you got them well trained.
Wonderful, aren't they? A little alarming at first, but they wouldn't hurt a fly. Though they do like manners. We haven't been properly introduced.
My name is Susan. This is Cardinal Erasmus and the Doctor.
Well, I don't really...
So, tell me, how do three Gallifreyans end up on Khaledon?
We only recently learned of your existence from a Countess Freya.
I thought it might be she who invited you.
Before then, we believed your people were more or less extinct. I've certainly never met any, but the Doctor has encountered them. Once.
Really? When was this?
The last days of their 1,000-year war. Long after we parted company.
The Last of the Khalids is a really strong idea. I think this idea of this alternate what-if version of the Khalids if they hadn't been wiped out or if they hadn't experimented on themselves to become Daleks, I think that's a really cool idea, and there is a bit of a tragedy. It's almost similar to the Mondasians and the Cybermen, where the Mondasians essentially become the Cybermen because of some weird cosmic coincidence, and there's this idea that maybe the Khalids are always fated to be like this. Maybe there is no other better path for the Khalids. I think there's a quiet tragedy to that, but it's not really embellished or built upon in The Last of the Khalids. And while I think that is a legitimate interpretation of the Khalids, like I said, it sounds very similar to the Mondasians, and I think it kind of makes the Daleks and the Khalids by proxy a little bit less unique. I also think that while there is some interesting world building in the first act of the story, and there's this really great idea that the Khalids essentially have access to a time window where they can see out into the universe, and this has informed their culture, it has informed their architecture, with the design of their Khalid dome being reminiscent of European architecture on Earth. Once all that world building is out of the way and the story itself has to start, there's not really a lot going on here, unfortunately. There is a twist in the story revolving around the identity of the mechanic, but honestly, it kind of feels like a twist just to be a twist. Kind of a, oh, you think this is going to be Davros, don't you? You think this is going to be Davros, don't you? And then it just kind of exists to not go in that direction, but then the story doesn't really evolve or change with that revelation. It does feel a little bit artificial. And the third act of the story just kind of devolves into a ho-hum espionage story, which ends with, and I kid you not, a fight between the Daleks and a bunch of robotic nuns called the Sisters of Fury, and I don't know why this story has robot nuns in it. It sounds cool, but it's like, what are we doing here? I think the cast are great. Carole Ann Ford gets a really great scene with the mechanic towards the end, and she continues to shine in these box sets. She continues to shine as a performer, but outside of that, there's just not a lot going on here, and it was kind of like, oh, you had this really great premise, this really great idea for the Khalids, and then you just didn't really do much with it. There's not even a lot going on here with the War Doctor, who maybe might want to see another way with the Khalids, and he just sort of just goes along for the ride. I don't think that the War Doctor had much agency in this story, and fair enough, it's a Susan story. This is Susan's war after all, and the War Doctor is a supporting player in this, but I don't know, I kind of feel like he should have had more to say about this, but he really doesn't. And then we go into the fourth and final chapter of this Susan and War Doctor reunion with The Vord Alliance by Andrew Smith. Now, Andrew Smith wrote the TV story Full Circle, and he's also written for the Vord in previous Big Finish stories, including one of their early adventures with the First Doctor. Rasmus, in a unsanctioned mission, sends the War Doctor and Susan to Saros Minor, which is a moon in a neighbouring star system where the Daleks are occupying it to build an elaborate big time weapon. Elite Gallifreyan commandos have already been sent to the moon in order to suss out the situation, but they haven't been heard from since. And Rasmus is going off the books for this mission because Karita, who is the head of this commando unit, is Rasmus's daughter. The Time Lords are on their way to wipe that star system out of time entirely, so it's up to the Doctor and Susan to get out of there really quickly, grab Karita, figure out what's going on, and get the hell out of there.
Too late, they're almost on us!
Come on then, Daleks, show yourselves!
Oh, not Daleks then. Not even Roboman.
Vord! They're Vord!
What are you doing on Saros Minor?
We could ask you the very same thing.
Answer, or my next shot will be through your heart.
Really? Which one?
That's enough, Lennox. I'll say if there's any killing to be done.
Yes, Dorina.
Thank you for your intervention.
It may only be a stay of execution. Search them for weapons.
At once.
Oh, not so rough.
We don't carry weapons. We're not a threat.
Who are you?
My name is Susan. This is my grandfather.
We are visitors.
Visitors? We shall see.
What is this?
Hey, I need that.
Lennox, what have you found? Bring it here. What is this device?
It's a homing beacon to help us find our way back to our ship.
Your ship is wrecked. So this is useless now, yes?
Once again, I really like the premise and the setup for this story. I especially like in the first act the friction between Rasmus and the Doctor and Susan, as they're effectively trying to clear up this massive mess that the Time Lords have created. The War Doctor says something along the lines of, when the Time Lords mess up, you don't do it by halves, do you? And I thought that was really funny. But the Doctor and Susan arrive at this moon, and surprise, because it's in the title, it turns out that the Vords are there as well. The Vords, created by Terry Nation in the 1960s, first appeared in the Keys of Marinus, and they don't really make much of an impression in that story apart from their elaborate headgear. And I will be honest, I didn't find the Vords particularly interesting in this story either. They're a duplicitous presence, and they're, you know, in terms of emotions, they're a bit more interesting than the single-minded exterminating Daleks, so I can kind of understand why you would pair Susan up with them in this story. And Big Finish completionists might be interested to know that this is a sort of pseudo-sequel to that 2014 Early Adventures story that I mentioned earlier, Domain of the Vord. The events of that story are referenced here, so there's that. But apart from that, the Vord, I could take them or leave them here, honestly. But listening to this story, at first, I was kind of taken aback at just how casual the Doctor was sounding. He was using phrases and words, and he was kind of holding himself very differently than how he does in his normal solo box sets. And at first I was like, this seems really out of character. I don't know if Andrew Smith kind of has got the language of the War Doctor down. However, I thought about it a bit more, And I think maybe this is actually a deliberate choice. I don't think this is an error on the episode's part. I think that this might be a great bit of storytelling to show how the War Doctor, who has been unable to have companions in this incarnation, he's had pseudo-companions like Case or Layla in previous ones, but having him basically go back to his factory settings because of the proximity of Susan, and he's now a bit more laid back, he's making a few more jokes here. I think that's a really interesting idea. Whether or not it's intentional, whether or not Jonathan Carley or Andrew Smith actually went into the material with that in mind, that's kind of what I got out of it. And I thought that was really interesting. It was actually really novel to hear a War Doctor be a bit more carefree, be a bit more like the Doctor, even though in the text he's still rejecting that name. The problem is that dynamic, textually, is not explored in the episode itself. In fact, like I said, this is kind of the end of the War Doctor and Susan's current adventures, and it kind of ends with a whimper. It kind of ends with so much unsaid. It ends with so much not really addressed or built upon. It feels like there's like so much material on the table here. Like, for example, even the familial connection with Rasmus wanting his daughter to be rescued and is willing to sacrifice a grandfather and granddaughter in order to do that, and even the potential parallel of Rasmus having to say goodbye to his daughter in the same way that the Doctor had to say goodbye to his granddaughter all those years ago. It's just dealt with off screen. It doesn't get addressed in the episode itself. There's so many great pieces on the table here for character work, but in the end, the Vord Alliance just becomes another trapped behind enemy line story. Like, you know, if you want those war stories, that's great, but you can get them in the Time War box sets. You can get those in the War Doctor box sets. For Susan's War, I want the character stuff, especially with the pairing of Carol Ann Ford and Jonathan Carley. I think that they are great together, but I want the material built upon. And in the end, the climax of the story is just, okay, bye now, Susan, and that's kind of it. I understand they maybe want to keep the door open for future adventures, but I think you should kind of treat these stories with a bit more heft. You should sort of be like, okay, this could be the last time that this Doctor and companion see each other. At least the characters should think of it like that, at least. But I don't know, it kind of feels a bit rushed. It makes me wonder if they were going to have more stories with Carol Ann Ford in this setting, and then Bad Wolf and Russell T Davies decided to use Susan in their new era of the show, so they were like, okay, we have to pull the brakes on that. This box set was recorded in March 2024, so this would have been a couple of months before Carol Ann Ford set foot in Bad Wolf Studios to film her appearances for season 2 of the new series of Doctor Who. So maybe I'm going all human, maybe I'm seeing patterns and things that aren't there, and I'll cop to that, but that's just how rushed the ending of this box set felt to me. That it made me think there's no way going into this story that they would just end it the way they would unless their hand was forced or something else happened here. I don't know. Susan's War Grandfather Time, as a box set, I can't really recommend it. There's just not a lot going on in the surface of these stories. They start with great premises. There's just not a lot going on under the hood in these stories, unfortunately. They're well performed and well put together with great music and sound design and some fun moments of dialogue and such, but in terms of actual stories, they start with great premises, but they don't build on them, they don't really evolve them or explore the conceits, and they leave all of this great character work on the table. I feel like you've got this great reunion with the War Doctor and his granddaughter, and it just nothing really happens here. I want to stress, these aren't bad box sets. It's incredibly rare for Big Finish to release anything I'd call, quote, subjectively bad, but I think that these were massive missed opportunities. I think in both box sets, Carol Ann Ford really showed up to play. Like I said last time, I think her performance in The Lost Son is gut-wrenchingly powerful. I think it's one of the best bits of acting Carol Ann Ford has ever done in her entire career. And while I like the idea of a relaxed War Doctor teaming up with his granddaughter in the Vord Alliance, and, you know, if that's the intent of the script, I'm all behind it, and I think that's really great, but then they don't build on it, they don't really address it in the text, and they don't really take these characters forward or do anything interesting or novel with them, which honestly is kind of the main appeal of Big Finish, doing interesting or novel or unique things and pushing these characters and exploring them in the way that the TV show can't, because it's more constrained to its continuity. I don't know, I think a lot has been left on the table here, which means that there is the opportunity to pick these pieces back up and explore these characters further at a later date, but Carol Ann Ford ain't getting any younger. But like I said, maybe their hand was forced by Bad Wolf. I don't know, maybe we'll find out years from now that there was going to be more stories penned in this adventure. And that's what I thought of Susan's War Grandfather Time. A bit more of a negative review, I apologise unfortunately, but you know, there's some good stuff in here, I just can't really recommend it, especially at the price tag that it's currently at. But what did you folks think of these Susan War box sets? If you have listened to them, let me know in the comment section below, and be sure to hit the like button, subscribe for more upcoming Doctor Who Big Finish reviews, and folks, I'll see you all next time.